Welcome everybody to our expert session on how HR consultants outsource client work. Really excited to be diving into this topic. It's probably, I would say, one of the best kept secrets in HR consulting. And I say that mostly because it took me like a year to learn that people were doing this. It's like I think a quiet practice for a lot of HR consultants, which means that if you're not doing it, this is going to be an incredible session because we'll be diving into what it is, how top HR consultants are scaling revenue through this practice. And Monica happens to be an expert in this area, so super excited to have her joining me for this one. Now, for those of you who don't know, my name is Dominic Lafort. I'm the founder and CEO here at Sherlock. We are an all-in-one platform for HR consultants and fractional HR leaders. We have purpose-built software to help you manage your clients, build projects, track time, create booking links to share with clients. Really just an out-of-the-box tool that can help you manage the day-to-day behind your HR consulting business. We are also, fun fact, launching some services soon, so keep an eye out for that coming up. As I mentioned, I'm joined here by my good friend, Monica. Monica, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. As Dominic said, I'm Monica Brown. I'm founder and CEO of Back Pocket Enterprises. I've been practicing HR for 25 years across a various range of industries like financial services, healthcare, commercial real estate, hospitality, and retail. Sometime during the pandemic, I transitioned into consulting after leaving my corporate job, and I was serving as the lead HR consultant and CEO for an emerging HR consulting firm in California. And working with this firm gave me the experience and gave me a front row view into what consultants actually struggle with on a day-to-day basis. And it eventually planted the seed for what would become Back Pocket. In 2025, I made the pivot from that front office kind of consultancy to the back office support and launched Back Office with one simple goal in mind: to be the consistent, reliable support system that HR consultants need to serve their clients and to grow their practice without burning out.
Amazing. Well, thank you. We'll definitely learn more about Back Pocket over the course of the presentation. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. This presentation is going to be covering our all-new playbook, the HR Consultant's Guide to Outsourcing Client Work. For everyone watching asynchronously, you can access this playbook by scanning the QR code. It'll take you to a website landing page where you can get access to our 20-page playbook. So all of our presentation today is going to be combing through this playbook content. So if you go ahead and open that link, you can follow along. A lot of really robust information in there. So let's go ahead and talk about what's going to be covered today. We're going to be looking at why HR consultants outsource client work. We'll look at the business case for outsourcing. There's actually some really great economic benefits to outsourcing client deliverables. We have a decision matrix that can help you decide what parts of the business you should and what parts of the business you shouldn't outsource to clients. And then, of course, some ethical and legal considerations, and then steps for getting started. Now, let's go ahead and take a look why HR consultants outsource client work. This is something that we actually learned during Sherlock's State of the HR Consulting Industry Report, where about 50% of HR consultants who said they were scaling solo were also working with external collaborators. And this is, I think, pretty interesting because there's often this like myth of the solo consultant. And for a lot of providers, that is true, but not for half of them, right? So there is some type of help that's happening, and it's not necessarily a formal member of the team. Monica, I'd love to kind of get your take on this. I know that you're really close to this work. Talk to me about some of the reasons why HR consultants outsource client deliverables.
One is just their client load has just grown to a point where they can no longer manage it by themselves. Maybe they have outside obligations to family and that they need the space to be able to concentrate on their family as well as support their clients. It may be outside of their expertise that they don't do. Like some consultants, have a very specific niche and clients come to them for something that's outside of that. Maybe they have a small team and the bench strength on their team is just not focused in that area where the client is requesting that work. There's a variety of reasons that you would outsource.
Yeah. I think the expertise one is particularly interesting because certainly there are very specialized areas of HR that people can build an entire career around. But I've also heard there's work that's totally in their wheelhouse, but they're like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and they're also capacity, right? So you're at
Yeah.
capacity. There's no more hours in the day. You have no more
Mhm.
hours in the day, no more days in the week that you can do this work. So,
Mhm.
that's the time to start looking outward.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the benefit of
Mm-hmm.
being in independent practice. Like
Mm-hmm.
if there are parts of this role that you don't like, you don't have to do it. I hear really frequently, like, I do HR minus recruiting and payroll. That's probably one of the more common. Like I don't touch those. And I'm
Right.
sure for those of you who've been in HR for long enough, you could if you really wanted to, but you don't have to, right? It's your practice.
Also, like a lot of people, like I hate handbooks. So, that's something that you don't have to do yourself. Maybe
Mhm.
you don't like, doing job descriptions. You don't like, making templates. That's
Yeah.
something totally that you could outsource.
Well, and I think some of the data we saw in the industry report as well is that the bulk of people who are doing this work as an independent HR consultant or fractional HR leader, they're coming from an in-house career of over 10 years, director level and above. And so there are times where the client will ask you for work where it's like, yes, I could make a job description.
But
Haven't
should
in
I?
15
Right?
years. Yeah, but should I?
But should I? As we progress, that's probably where you started off in your HR career. As a generalist, a rep, or whatever. And you were doing that kind of stuff. But as you progress, like you said, you've been this director, this CHRO for 10, 15 years. Doing a job description is not something that you've done in years. Yes, you could
Mhm.
do it, but do you need to do it at that level? Is that where your client is really asking you to use your time and hours for them at your billable rate?
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's the key here is that there's so many different
Mhm.
reasons for why an HR consultant might be outsourcing. You touched on something earlier, is this isn't unique to solo consultants, but also small teams.
Mhm.
I think you talked about like not necessarily having a bench where a specific expertise is needed.
Right.
But I think something else that's valuable to remember is like a team can be stretched just as thin as an individual.
Yes, they
And
can.
unless you're working with a big agency, you can't always solve that problem by hiring.
That's correct. That's correct. And that's where pulling from an outsourced resource will help you, will give you that extra pair of hands that you need. And it's just a natural part of your business. If your business is growing, you're going to need help.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
right
And
in place. So,
it's a really great way to sort of build a little bit of a web behind who completes what work and how. And certainly there's moments where you're building a practice where it is going to make sense to hire an additional team member, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that outsourcing can sometimes function as a bit of a stopgap between flying solo and having members of a team, or having a small team. And like, do I really want it to make a large team? Maybe you don't want to manage a ton of people.
no, and then your outsourcing can come in a variety of sources. It could be seasonal, just like when you were in
Mhm.
corporate, you hired different people to do different things at different times. So maybe it's seasonal. Maybe you have busy periods of the year, and you're like, okay, I need to bring in like one or two people to help me get through this period, and then you have a hiatus from them, and then you bring them back. So it doesn't always have to be a consistent everyday kind of outsource. It could be whatever you need it to be in order
Mhm.
to deliver the services and products that you need to your client.
I love that. Now, of course, all of these different reasons are where outsourcing can come into play, whether you're flying solo or you're on a small team. I think there's always going to be some type of ceiling that you will hit. And that ceiling is your practice can only handle as much work as there are hours in the day and the expertise allows. And so outsourcing client deliverables can raise that ceiling.
Mhm.
Now, there is a pretty strong business case behind outsourcing, and really that's because of the billable hour problem. I kind of just touched on that. Like, there's only so many hours in the day that you can sell as a consultant.
Right.
And yeah, there's strategies for pricing and packaging services, not rooting it in time, but in outcomes. But
Right.
at the end of the day, there's only 24 hours that you could possibly work, right? Like,
Right.
you are constrained to time, whether you sell by time or not. And on the flip side, your billable rates as a senior HR leader, they may not work for a client
Mhm.
asking for a JD template, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so it's like, from a pricing decision, does it make sense for you as a provider to be working this time? And does it make sense for your clients to be getting this type of work from you?
Right. Because there's that moment that we all ask, right? Consultants ask, is holding on to this actually for my benefit or is it for the client's benefit? And if you have a structure where you have people that work for you and you can produce consistent work where it doesn't matter who the work comes from, the work still feels the same, it looks the same, it sounds the same, then that's a good outsourcing process that you have. I want to talk about when you talked about the billable rate problem. I don't know if I'm going ahead, but a lot of times when we structure our business, when we're hanging that shingle of HR consultant, we have one rate. And I know this is not like we're not giving class on billing, but it's something to think about. Like you have that one rate, but if you have a tiered rates, and that's where this outsourcing comes into play. Like you can offer, when you said like because the client probably does not want you to do a job description at your highest billable rate. But if you have another billable rate, you can still do that and still keep that client and still produce the work that they need.
100%. Yeah. I know some HR consultants who are billing clients in the $200 to $250 per hour range, which is great when the client's receiving strategy, but it can hurt if they're getting billed at that rate for something that really doesn't need that level of expertise.
Right.
Yeah.
So true.
When we look at some of the math behind the outsourcing practice, if you were to say be a consultant who is billing clients at $150 per hour, and let's say you find an admin level contributor who you are billing clients at $80 an hour, there's some really great math that can happen here. And of course, this is going to depend on your billable rates and your outsourcing billable rates. But if you look at the number of hours that could be completed by an admin, and you look at what the price would be for the hours completed by you, outsourcing can provide clients a discount. And that's kind of what you're touching on, Monica, right? It's like, you don't have to bill everything at your billable rate. You can bill at the rate for the admin. And of course, we're running a business here. You should always have some type of uplift on that cost. And so that's what's going to introduce margin for you. And so when you look at a handful of deliverables, 3 JDs, a couple phone screen interviews, and some onboarding guides, that's 20 hours of time that you could hand off to an admin who works at a lower rate. So your client realizes a lower fee, and you're still capturing revenue from hours you didn't have to work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with those hours, right?
Exactly. And what do you do with those extra hours? So I think, I instantly was like, take those 20 hours and put them right back into strategic work. And Monica was like, whoa.
No, there's other things. Yeah.
So talk to me, Monica, about some of the ways a consultant can or should be using those extra hours.
So that is how we think, right? We have the extra hours. What could I do then? I could do more work, but the object is not to do more tactical work. The object is to maybe build deeper relationships with your clients, get to know their businesses better, embed yourself more as that advisor, as that trusted coach. Look for other areas where you could provide benefits to them in terms of leadership coaching. It's also a way to get more clients. Maybe you're doing more network. It gives you the opportunity to go out and join different kind of networking groups or go to different events where you can meet new people, meet new clients, meet new maybe partners that you could partner with on different projects. And then also, this is the last thing on our mind is self-care, right? That's a very important part. We're working 1,000 miles an hour, but we still need to take care of ourselves. We need to eat. We need to spend time with our families. We need to take a vacation. We need to, what happens when we're sick? We need to take care of ourselves. And that's usually like the thing that falls off the radar is taking care of ourselves, because we're spending so much time giving our whole selves to our business, but we still need to give ourselves to our families, our friends. We still need to have that life outside of work, and having those hours can help you do that. So maybe on Fridays, you only work a half a day and you take the rest of the day off. You go get a mani-pedi, you go whatever, go to the movies, go get ice cream, take a walk, build in your exercise time. Those are all things that you could do with these hours that you now have in your hands.
Right. When you're not feeling like you're being pushed to the limit. And if you don't work the full 10-hour day, you're going to be running behind on deliverables. Yeah, no, I feel that.
Right.
So don't just put it into billable work. You can, but there's a lot of different ways that time can be valuable to you as a business owner, because certainly there's revenue you can generate from billable work, but there's revenue you can generate from finding a new client or from finding a partner, a referral. So a lot of different ways to use those recovered hours. And thank you, Monica, for pumping the brakes on that.
Somebody said eat lunch. Yes, eat lunch.
Yeah, eat lunch, 100%. Now, for the outsourcing matrix for client work, certainly for me, I feel like I have to do everything. And it's not that I don't have people I can rely on. It's just like a inner voice that I have to constantly fight. There are moments where it's like you, as someone who has potentially been doing this solo for some time, are going to be like, what parts of this business should I be outsourcing, right? And so that's what we're going to be taking a look at right now, is knowing when to outsource client work, because it's not always obvious, especially if you're anything like me with that inner voice that's like, do it all yourself.
I could do it. I could do it.
Yeah. Burn out. Have fun, kid.
What's that? That's okay.
Yeah. Now, this is going to be in your playbook, larger than you see now, but there's some questions to ask yourself. So go ahead and think of like one client deliverable and ask yourself, is this advisory work or is this tactical work? It's going to fall into one of those two buckets almost every time. And then if it's advisory, is that advisory work within your specialty? And I think I mentioned this earlier, like, is it in your specialty and it's work you want to work on, you know?
Right.
And if it's in your wheelhouse and you enjoy that type of work, keep it in-house. That's the perfect type of work for yourself. If it's not in your area of specialty, or it's not something that you necessarily want to be keeping on your plate, that's a great opportunity to find a specialist, right? This wouldn't be an HR admin. This would probably be more of a peer. Would you say, Monica?
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be an HR admin. You're looking at somebody that's been like an HR manager, senior HR generalist. Maybe it's definitely an HR business partner. That's the kind of level that you're looking at for that kind of stuff.
Right. So if you're in this vein, it's a little bit of a different conversation. I'm curious now, when you think about, like, let's say you're working with a client and the client's asking you for compensation benchmarking strategy, and you're like, yeah, I'm probably not the best person for this. Do you ever see examples of referring to an advisor partner that either has the same or higher rates?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, they may have it, but it depends on what the relationship is. If I'm going to them just as a resource, like, hey, I have this client, let me talk to you about it and get some feedback from them. But if I actually need them to partner with me to do the work, then we have to talk about billable rates, because maybe it's not at their rate, maybe because I have a different rate than they have. And so those are things to take into consideration. And so maybe we work out a blended rate or something, and I still need to, have my upcharge on it to make sure that I'm meeting my margins and that I'm taking care of my business. So it just depends, that their billable rate, like, not everybody's going to tell you their billable rate too. So you always have to come in with what you think and ask, is this, can you work within this margin or this rate that I've curated for this client?
That's smart. Now, for the tactical side, so if you are asking this question about, is this client deliverable, advisory, or tactical, and you're like, this is definitely leaning towards tactical work, there's a couple questions you should ask yourself. Does this require a significant amount of my time, right? If it's super time-consuming work, maybe it's not the best from a revenue perspective. Do you have capacity to be taking on this work? And then if you do this work based on the number of hours that you think it will take, does that rate create friction for the client from a cost perspective? And so really it's looking at those three questions. And you may have one signal where you say, okay, maybe this is something I should be outsourcing. If you're at 2 to 3 signals where it's yes to 2 or 3 of those, that's definitely an area of the business that you can and should be outsourcing.
Correct.
If you're not outsourcing today, you might even have in the back of your mind, I can't wait to get XYZ off my plate. But if you don't have that clear view, ask yourself some of these questions, run different deliverables through this, and you should get some clarity around where you should direct your time and attention to freeing up some of your time.
Correct.
So building and managing your collaborator network, this entire strategy relies on you finding other people to bring into your business. And so that's not something that just happens overnight, and it's not something that we necessarily have the skill for. And certainly everyone on this call has a background in HR. You know what it means to hire an employee, but that's not what this strategy is, right? And so you're thinking about outsourcing from a perspective of building a bench, right? And this isn't just a single collaborating partner. This is a collection of different people that can solve different gaps within your consulting practice. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the specialist collaborators, maybe you have that go-to compensation strategist that they knock it out of the park every time. You don't love that work, so you go to them. And then maybe you don't do talent acquisition or executive hiring, find your partner for that. How many people would you say would be healthy for a consultant to realistically have on their bench, Monica?
It really depends on their business, but on average, I would say if you have 2 to 3 people that you could go to for different things, you have implementation specialists. A lot of small businesses are implementing HRS systems, the payroll systems, the Gustos, the Bamboo, all those kind of things. And so you need people that maybe can do that implementation work, because most of that is data entry, right? So should you be doing that data entry? Like you said, the comp specialist, learning and development, that's a skill. Not everybody can write a training program. So if you can't write that, find somebody that needs that. If that's what your client is asking you for, you may be able to deliver it, but putting it together and creating all the points in the PowerPoints and actually creating the material may be something that's outside of your area of expertise. Those are kind of people that you would bring in to do that.
100%. So if I were to take your answer, it just depends on the business, right? What are the parts of the business you don't want to do or can't do, and what parts of the business should be going to sort of that admin collaborator that you find.
Right.
Now, talk to me about the difference between outsourcing and referrals, because I think that these concepts can be blended. I want to get your perspective, Monica.
Right. So referrals, when we look at referrals, we should look at it as you're handing off a client to someone else. Once you make that introduction, you're out of the picture. Like you step back and they take on the relationship themselves. Where outsourcing is, you're still part of that relationship and you're bringing in someone to help you. And so when you're introducing your outsourced resource, this is a member of your team. We don't necessarily have to tell our clients like, hey, this is a 1099 worker on my team, but this is just a function of my team. And these are the expertise that I can bring to your organization to help you with your HR needs. So referrals, you're handing them off. Outsourcing, you're still in the middle. You're still controlling, what happens with the client, and they're in the consultant or the outsourced person is working under your umbrella, working under the way that you do business, the way that you process, the way that you service your clients. You are still in the mix. They don't have control over your client. Sometimes they're not necessarily interacting with your clients. They're just there to do the tactical work.
Okay. Yeah. It all comes down to, do you own the relationship or not? Yeah. And I think that that's certainly, from someone building a business, having that level of control and ownership is going to give you better insight into what's happening across your business. And certainly from an HR perspective, it's really useful to understand services your client's receiving from other providers. So if you punt that off to someone else and you don't have that line of sight, it can cause complications for you later when you really should have known what happened with the recommendation or the strategy they received.
Right. But usually when you're doing, like, when you refer out, unless you're referring like an accountant, that's something that's way outside of your wheelhouse. So your client can deal with them directly.
Who wants to know about that, right?
Right. I don't want to know about that, right? No.
Yeah.
But if you're doing something that's HR related, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be involved in a relationship, because that's going to be more of an outsourcing kind of thing. And you still are there. You may not be working on it, but you are the broker of that relationship, the broker of what's going on. So you will still have ownership in that part of it. I don't think too many consultants will just kind of hand over everything, unless it's something that's like HR adjacent. When you're talking about benefits, you're talking about those kind of things. Those are kind of HR adjacent, not things that day-to-day HR people build and do. So that's when I think of it like that. That's the way.
That's a really great delineation of even like what should be referral, what should be outsourcing.
Right.
Now, for where to find collaborators, if you were to be talking to an HR consultant or the consultants on this call, and they're thinking that they want to outsource, where should they be looking to find people that they can bring into their operation?
Right. So these are all great things, like networking events. You meet a ton of people at networking events. You just never know who is looking for what, where they are in their stage of their their company, how their HR department is structured. Maybe the office manager is doing, HR, and that's a good way, that's a good in. But networking events, HR events, job boards, I don't find too much on there, but freelancing platforms like Upwork, you can find a ton of talent on there, HR consultants who still probably working in corporate or who maybe just left corporate and looking for their next project or their next gig. And so you can find a lot of freelancers out there who maybe want to stay in the freelancing lane or just are doing this until they can get to their next corporate job or build their consultancy. But also your friend networking, your friend network is good too. Don't discount that. You're just having these simple conversations with them about what you're doing, and you might find your next big collaborator, your trusted collaborator from your friends. They're a great referral source.
When we were sort of talking through the contents of the playbook and putting this presentation together, you mentioned a little bit of a red flag with Upwork about potential misrepresentations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sometimes the consultants are not as experienced as they say. And so that's really where your vetting process comes in, and going through this is an interview process, just like anything else. You are interviewing people to come work for you. So don't take that for granted. Just because they're freelancers or they're 1099 doesn't mean you can't ask questions. You can't vet. You can't ask for references for work. You can't ask to see certain things. If they said they created certain toolkits, maybe ask to see that and get a real understanding for what they are, for what their capabilities are, their experiences. Don't miss that part in being able to ask those questions.
Yeah, I see Val says she's dealing with that right now with an Upwork consultant.
Yeah, because it's a good, Upwork makes you look really good. You could say like, I've done this, I've done that. They have the resume on there. When I was using Upwork for the HR consulting firm that I was working with, I always put qualifying questions on there, maybe 3 to 5 questions about specifically talking about their experience. And you can tell from those answers whether or not they've done it or they're just making stuff up. So those questions help a lot, those qualifying questions.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something that is useful to remember is that a lot of these people are in-house. They want to get into consulting or they're just starting their journey. And being in a marketplace is incredibly competitive. And so you may try to make yourself a little bit more appealing and attractive to the people finding you. I know when Sherlock was in its development stage, part of what I needed to do is hear from HR consultants. And I would say, I don't want to say made the mistake, but I did a lot of my research by connecting with Upwork consultants, which I don't think is actually the best window into what consulting looks like. Because the consultants who have practices, they're oftentimes not on Upwork. Different types of client work. Yeah. So just useful to sort of, consider what's available there. In terms of vetting collaborators, you did touch on this a little bit. I want you to talk about some of the different things that you should be looking for as an HR consultant when you're evaluating whether or not somebody should be part of your outsourcing program.
Right. So beyond relevant experience, you're going to get that from the resume. You're going to get that from talking to them, but also do their philosophy on HR. Does it match with your philosophy? Is because you're running a business, you're servicing your clients in a certain way. You have a certain mindset about how you would like your work to look, how you want your client relationships to go. So talking to them about that, what is their outlook? Do they just want to be behind? Do they always want to be behind the scenes, or is their goal to start their own consulting firm? Those are 2 things you need to consider. And then also when you're looking at your collaborators, like we talked about earlier, do you just need seasonal people, or are you looking for people to be that consistent resource for you, to walk along with you during your whole time in your consultancy? And so that's a different team. That's a different team support that you're building, not someone that's just like, oh, I'm building my consultancy, so I have 6 months, to help you. That's a different thing. And that also works with your client services. If you have somebody that's temporary, if you have all these people that come in at different times, you never have that consistent service, that continuity of service to your clients. Everything looks different. So when you're doing it beyond what you've put on here, I think having a similar mindset about work, structure, philosophy, their goals in this whole process.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been something I've heard from consultants, is this fear that if they bring someone in, they're going to have them poach clients. And I think that's definitely a concern and something that you should be evaluating when looking at a partner, is like, what are their goals? Are they trying to launch their own consulting business simultaneously? And this is a risk for me, or do they prefer the back office tactical support and
Right.
that's their lane? And so it's really helpful to understand there. Something you mentioned to me that I think is a really valuable point is that part of the outsourcing practice is oftentimes having a collaborator deliver work on your behalf, and this concept of adapting to you. And you mentioned, I think, tone and style. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when you have collaborators, whatever work is provided to the client, no matter if you did it, your back office, team did it, it should all sound like it's coming from one person. You're usually bringing collaborators after you've worked with your client for a little bit, so your client kind of knows the work that's coming from you. And so when you bring on that collaborator, it should have the same kind of feeling, the tone, the verbiage that you use. Whether you're using super professional language or you're using more of a relaxed kind of tone, those are things that come into play that people often overlook. So you want to make sure that your collaborators can adapt to your style, that they understand, like, this is how we speak when we produce documents. These are the words, the verbiage, the tone. That we use a warm tone, we use a more professional tone, a more strict tone. Those are things that they should pay attention to. Not only that, but the structure of the document. So if you have a template that you use, if you've done job descriptions for this client before, when they get another job description, it should look the same. It should look and feel the same as the one you've done before, because you don't want to have this mishmash of documents going through your client's organization. So those kind of things that the collaborator will need to adapt to. Can they, and that's another thing, can they make that pivot? Because they're not just working with one client. And you're in corporate, when you have your corporate job, your company, how they talk, how they feel, but now you have 5 different people, 5 different businesses that you need to adapt to. Can your collaborator adapt to those different businesses?
Yeah. I've had a pretty entrepreneurial spirit my whole life and took a stab at doing friends' homework in high school. Failed miserably. If you're going to do your friend's homework, at least make it look like their work.
One thing I learned is that I can adapt your voice. If I work with you enough, I'm like, okay, I know how Dominic speaks, so this is how I'm going to say it. So it'll sound like you, and that's what your clients want. They, even though they might know you have people on your team, they don't want to feel it, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to feel that difference from your work to whatever work that you're getting from your collaborator. They want that same kind of level of work that they've been receiving up until this point.
I think AI is actually probably really helpful here. If you have a collection of work that you've built, being able to sort of run some of your documentation, your language, your tone of voice, and having AI produce some type of document that can summarize some of how you speak, that could be a really valuable resource to share with a collaborator, so that they have rules.
AI makes it much easier than before, because before you just had to read through everything and kind of practice. Does this sound right? No, change this word, do this word. But with the AI, you run it through there, like, does it match? Does the tone match? Does the structure match? All that kind of stuff. So that's a great tool.
100%. Now, clearly defining the relationship. Talk to me about terms, contracts. Like, what is the best setup between a consultant and a collaborator that they work with?
Definitely have a contract. That's the most important thing. Even if it's somebody that you are familiar with. We have a lot of friends in our networking group, and it's like, oh, I've known Monica for this long, I'm just going to pull her in. But you should have a contract, because you need to lay out the terms, like, what's the expectation, what's included, what's not included. That language about no poaching should be in there, it should always be in there, not depending on, because you never know what the collaborator may come in contact with. So you want to have that in there. If it's a term, if it's only for 6 months, you want to make sure that's in there. The billing rate, all of those things should be clearly defined in the contract, so that there's no question. If anything happens, you can that's a reference that you can go to say, no, this is what we talked about. This is the SOW that was attached to the agreement. These are the objectives that we wanted to accomplish. And if it changes, you just do an addendum to the SOW. But you should have a contract in place. That's the most important thing. And then talk about ownership of products that you produce. Sometimes you're producing templates. Who does that belong to? At the end of the day, if the consultant leaves, it belongs to you. It's part of your organization, and this stays with you. Those kind of things should also be defined in there.
More than just like a contractor agreement, it sounds like there should be a couple different clauses and policies that add some very clear terms and definition to the relationship.
Right. Who is the client contact?
Yeah.
You are the client, the consultant is the client contact. These are people that work in the back office, or they may have some client contact, but it's limited to A, B, and C.
So in terms of managing access to client data, there's a couple different tools that you and I talked about. Sherlock, great CRM.
Of course.
I know you manage your team on Sherlock, and
do.
there's some people who are joining this call who are also on the platform. One of the things that we specifically built out was the ability to manage permissions at the client level. So for example, let's say you've got 15 clients, some of them are prospects, some of them are inactive, some of them are active clients. Maybe you have a collaborator who only needs to see 2 accounts. We make that possible, where you can easily control how much information they have access to. So that's been really useful. You mentioned Google Drive as being a really valuable tool. Can you talk to me about that one as well?
Yeah, I want to talk about Sherlock though first, because my team loves Sherlock. Like because they don't want information overload. So, we have a bunch of stuff in there, but when they can go in and just see the tasks that are assigned to them, they don't need to know every task. They just want to know what's on my plate, what can I do? And they really love that fact that they can just see exactly what's assigned to them, mark it off, get through it, and then it kind of frames how they work and gives them that comfort to know like they're not being overwhelmed by different information and having to ask questions that have no relation to what they're doing. Google Drive could be used for a variety of things. So it has a shared drive feature, which I love, but you can create shared drives for your teams. You can create shared drives for your clients. And so the difference is you upload for your team, you upload the working documents that you have to do. And for your client shared drive, you upload the finished documents. It also gives your clients a way to communicate with you, to have a repository of documents that they can send you. It also allows you to have separate chat features for each client, and you can keep all of your communication in there. And so when you're communicating with your clients, your whole team can see it without having to struggle with a bunch of emails coming through their email box. They can go straight to the chat and see whatever communication is back and forth, and you can assign tasks from there. Google Drive, I've always been a Microsoft person, but Google Drive has some really great features that I think Microsoft is behind on. So yeah, I think Google Drive is a great platform if anybody has it for things like that.
Last one you mentioned was the password manager. Talk to me about that one.
Yeah, so a lot of times you're sharing passwords. If you have collaborators, maybe your client has given you access to their payroll system or their HRS system or some other platform that they have, and instead of you sharing your password physically with them and telling them my username is this and my password is this, you share a link to the site. Password's already in there. They just launch the site and they're already logged in. And it also helps if the collaborator leaves, you don't have to change your password. You just remove them from your password sharing site and you're done. But it's a more secure way to share sites. And this also goes back into like, do you have to be the one to do the work? Because normally if you're the only one with access, then yes, you have to do the work. But if there's a way you could share access so people can still get in and do some of the work, Password Manager is a great way to do that.
What do you use for your password manager?
I use LastPass.
Okay, amazing. LastPass, 1Password, really standard industry options there. Now, for the ethical and legal considerations, obviously, we're talking about clearly defined relationships between you and a client, and then between you and a collaborator. There are policies that are in place, some ethics behind the work. I think it's just worth a conversation here. But I think the thing to remember is like having an outsourced collaborator, that is not a dirty little secret. I think some people like, do I have to hide it? Talk to me about that, Monica.
You don't have to hide it, but I think a lot of times, and this goes back to, like we're going to do it all. So when clients come to us, they're buying you, right? And so you want to still sell that image that you're getting me, but really they're getting a whole team. And there's nothing wrong with saying like, I have a team that helps me, because hopefully they're not expecting you to do all the work yourself, because who can manage that, unless you have one client and the volume of work is not that high. But they should be happy that you have a team. And so you positioning that is not so much that, like I said before, like you have these 1099 workers, like I have a team that can handle whatever projects, like you have training coming. Oh, I have my team, my team and I are going to get together. We're going to strategize and we're going to come up with a training plan for you. That sounds a lot better. That sounds like you have bench strength. That sounds like you have a growing organization. That sounds like you have a robust organization behind you, support. So saying that you have help is not a negative thing. It's a plus in my eyesight.
Right. And I think the clients, as you mentioned, they don't really expect you to handle everything. Now, there's some language that we crafted, and we're not going to spend too much time on it. Again, it's all in your playbook, but I wanted to share some of the different verbiage that you can use when communicating with your clients. So start by framing the relationship. And this is only really necessary if you find yourself in a situation with a client where you know you're about to outsource. If you're working with a client and there's no outsourcing in the future, you don't need to proactively mention it. But if you see outsourcing on the horizon, you can say something like, for this type of deliverable, I have a trusted partner I work with. They bring specific expertise in this area, and I've worked with them extensively. I'll make sure you know what to expect in terms of communication and involvement. Which, to say something like this assures the client that this isn't someone you're bringing in randomly. There's familiarity there, there's trust, which is something to build towards if you're working with someone new, so that you can frame it in this way.
But it also gives you that confidence that they're staying with you because your clients come to you because they know that they have a level of comfort with you, but to know that that you can still service them outside of something that's not native to your list of services gives the client a comfort, because they know, like you said, they know that you vetted the person and they know that you know them, so they must be good. So it kind of takes the pressure off of them to have to go find somebody else to do this, or you just saying, I don't do that, good luck, go find somebody on your own. You can be that connector for the next the project.
I come from the restaurant space, and I never trust a server who tells me everything is good on the menu, right? If I ask, what's good, what's not good, and I think that when you're talking about consulting services, it also adds trust to tell the client, this is not a strong area for me. I have this person. And I think it signals to the client that you care more about the outcomes than just making money off of them or being the sole provider. Yeah.
Right. You are that partner, right? You're that partner for them. You're that person that's going to walk alongside their business to make sure that they have what they need to be compliant, to be whole, to be a valuable business to their community and to their employees.
Yeah. Something we mentioned earlier on in some of the economics behind outsourcing is leading with the client benefit. So if we're talking about framing this to a client and you're handing off some tactical work to an admin who's working at a lower rate, that's really useful to share with the client. So this is something my HR admin handles on my behalf. Because it doesn't require senior level expertise, I'm able to price this differently, which keeps costs lower for you on this type of deliverable. I'll stay close to the work and provide the final review before handing it over to you. And so when you're able to frame it like that, the client is very aware that, hey, they're not charging me the full amount. So-and-so is going to handle it for me. This avoids you ever feeling like you have to discount your services, because you have a lever where your client can realize a lower rate.
Right. Law firms do this, accounting firms do this, bookkeeping firms do this. You have a senior level person who sits in all the senior level kind of planning meetings, strategy meetings, but they bring in an associate to come and do the actual work. And so you're billed at these different rates, and it does help you control costs. It does help the client feel like, okay, well, I'm not being, this is a bad word, but fleeced, because I don't have any other word in my head right now. But it does help them realize the value of your business and your consultancy and your partnership with them. It's like, okay, I can get all these different range of services without having to pay such a senior level rate all the time. And that helps them with their budgeting, so they can actually see that they can afford HR, because a lot of businesses don't think they can afford HR because they're so expensive. But when you have these different kind of rate levels, it lets them see like, no, this is totally possible.
Yeah, I love when my lawyer hands things off to his associate.
Exactly.
I never want to talk to you.
Yeah, never. Or you're timing it right. You're timing like, okay, you got 10 minutes. Let me say what I'm going to say. Okay, bye.
Yeah. And then lastly, we talked about some of the systems that you should have in place. Something that's useful to reassure the client is I have a confidentiality agreement in place with every collaborator I work with. And I use systems that limit their access to only the information relevant to their scope of work. Your data does not leave a controlled environment. Now, this is not just something that's nice to say. You should have things in place where you can say this and be honest about it. But certainly, given the nature of HR, it is sensitive data. And for some business owners, some of what you do for them can be embarrassing, or they have insecurity around. So making sure that they have assurances that everything is protected and safe and handled well just adds credibility to you as an operator.
Right. And we're not talking about their like business structure, but we're talking about sometimes the employee information that you have access to. And again, being that person, if you have a password sharing file and you're shared with their payroll system, that's sensitive information. And you want to know that the person that you're working with is going in there to do what they're supposed to do and come out and not take advantage of social security numbers that they may see, bank account numbers that they may see. That's the kind of level of trust you have to have with your collaborators, but that also goes into your agreement. That's a protection for you. And one more thing I don't think we talked about is that your collaborators should have their own insurance too. So their own business insurance, so that protects, if something happens with them, something happens with you, everybody's protected all the way around.
Yeah. I'm gonna go put that in the playbook. That was great. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we would love to have you join our newsletter so you can stay up to date on all of our upcoming webinars and free resources that are purpose-built for HR consultants and fractional HR leaders. We're super excited to be building for this community and sharing the stage with incredible partners like Monica. So thank you all very much. If you are ready to scale your HR consulting business, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to support you. Thank you, Monica, so much. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.